And I'm going to use the word Myanmar, Burma, I'm going to intertwine those two because it's very contentious which one you call it. Some people like, some of the locals like Burma, but the military called it Myanmar. And in Burma, we've got just this huge amount of ethnic groups, something like 80 different ethnic groups. But in 1962, the military took over Burma. And pretty much they've been fighting and scrapping with all these ethnic groups for all this time. Fast forward to 2010. The Burmese military incredibly step aside and they let Aung San Suu Kyi, who is their Mandela, right? The best way to describe it, their Mandela or their Gandhi or their Martin Luther King Jr.
At
that time, they let her run with her party, the NLD, in a democratic election. And they step aside, right, which is quite amazing. And here's the big thing is that her party, the NLD, and her ran 85% of the government. The last 15% were the military and the police. And they were continued to be run by the generals who always ran the place, right? So in a sense, she could do lots of things, but she couldn't do that last 15%. Right. Now, that caused lots and lots of problems, particularly around the issue, which is deep and close to my heart, which is the situation of the Rohingya. Can't really go into the Rohingya stuff, another day perhaps. But she still stayed in charge of about 85% of the government. Then we go to 2020. There's another election, or there's a couple elections later. Not only does Aung San Suu Kyi win the election with the NLD party, but she wins by 80%. That's when the military said, enough. We don't like this popularity. We don't like where this is going. She's out of here.
Right.
So the military gave the middle finger to 80% of the country, and they have just not taken this line down, right? They've combined their forces with many of the ethnic groups, and they've just said, enough is enough. And they've gone and done the whole Rebel Alliance thing, the Star Wars thing, and said, you're the empire, you're the emperor, we're the rebels, we're fighting back. They don't want to be a North Korea. Right. That's exactly what this Myanmar government wants to turn them into. So these guys have been pushing back. And it's a familiar story. Journalists, protesters, getting arrested, getting killed. At least 1,170 people have been killed by the military. I think it's much, much more. There's hardly any way to verify that numbers. It's probably the low end of the scale. 7,240 people have been detained and tortured in captivity, including journalists, including Australia, including lots of Americans. I mean, this is the real deal. This is the thing that we see in our films, that we see on TV. If you've seen photos of these young Burmese guys, they've got the three fingers up, right? They got it directly from the Hunger Games. But while Jennifer Lawrence goes home with, six-figure salaries, these guys get shot in the streets. They are, to me, they're the real deal. I found these guys villains versus heroes of Myanmar, and I just looked at it and I saw them using the comic book format to try to get their message to their own people, right? To put into stark terms who were the goodies and who were the baddies of this conflict. Who's Darth Vader and who's Luke Skywalker? I asked the creator of this one whether he wanted to talk to me or record an interview like this one, and he said no, he's still got family there, they're still in danger. So he wrote down to me, just what his passion was. He loves anime, he loves manga, he loves Rick and Morty. He's like us, he's a geek. And if you take a look at heroes versus villains, these guys lay out some of the key characters. So one of the characters is Thin Zar, and she is a nurse. Reminds me very much of the White Helmets in Syria. A nurse who races out. She speaks for freedom. She speaks for all kinds of things. And she was helping people, and they just shot her. They shot her dead. And then, of course, he's got numerous villains. One guy in particular, well, I will only describe as the militant monk. Mm-hmm. He's basically the government-employed Buddhist monk designed to bring up hate against the Muslims. And this guy is just, when he speaks, the hate just dribbles out of his mouth. I really encourage people to not only to take a look at this particular website, but I encourage people around the world to consider how pop culture and geek culture can be more than just imaginary lands and more than just taking us to multiverses and places around the universe and bring up fantastical ideas. The thing about geek culture is it gives us stories, and stories helps us understand life. They help us understand morals, and it's important that we use those stories to get back down to earth, to get back into stuff that's happening here in the real world. Myanmar, the Rohingya, the Karen, and all these guys. But you go around the world, you can go further up to China, the Uyghur, Africa, Tingray. There's a whole heap of stuff going on there in the Philippines. Stories that don't always make it on to CNN every night or Fox or whatever the hell you watch.
Let's remind our friends to please click on the subscribe button and hit that notification bell so you know when we have new videos out.
Subscribe!
Subscribe!
Die or die.